Night never falls all at once in history. It arrives quietly, in a sealed room, in a whispered decision, in a document signed by candlelight while the city sleeps. Somewhere, a child dreams of becoming king. Somewhere else, men are already deciding how that child will die. This is where Game of Thrones truly begins. Not with dragons, not with prophecy, but with Europe. Cold, damp, exhausted Europe, where crowns were never symbols of glory, only invitations to violence. For centuries, power in Europe rested on bloodlines so thin they tore under the slightest pressure. A king's death did not bring closure, it opened a wound. Every succession became a question, every question became a war. The fantasy of Westeros did not exaggerate this, it inherited it. In medieval kingdoms, the crown was not a reward for virtue, it was a liability passed from parent to child like a curse. Whoever wore it became the center of every ambition, every grievance, every unresolved betrayal stretching back generations. People did not ask whether a ruler was good, they asked whether he would live. And often he did not. In these worlds, loyalty was temporary, mercy was dangerous, and hesitation was fatal. Men swore oaths they fully intended to break when survival demanded it. Women married not for love, but to stabilize borders that would collapse anyway. A kingdom was not a family. It was a battleground pretending to be one. This is the soil from which Westeros grows, and England was its first rehearsal.
England did not fall apart all at once. It cracked, quietly first. A weak king, a disputed heir, advisors who spoke in reassurance while preparing for war. The people did not feel it immediately, but the nobility did. They always do. They sensed the crown slipping, and when power loosens, hands reach for it. Two families rose from the same royal blood, Lancaster and York. Cousins, uncles, nephews, men bound by lineage who would soon learn that shared ancestry did not prevent slaughter. In fact, it made it easier. Killing a stranger is war. Killing a relative is succession. The Wars of the Roses were not fought for ideology or faith. They were fought for certainty. Each side believed that if their man sat the throne, the killing would stop. It never did. Battles were brutal and fast. Nobles who lost were not captured for ransom, as tradition once allowed. They were executed. Titles were stripped, estates seized. The old rules collapsed under the weight of fear. Victories lasted weeks. Revenge lasted generations. King Henry VI, gentle and devout, sat at the center of the storm like a child placed on a throne too large for him. He prayed while others ruled. He trusted while others plotted. He was crowned, deposed, restored, and deposed again, until he was quietly murdered in captivity. No dragon burned him. History did not need one. England learned a terrible lesson during these wars. Removing a king does not remove the problem, it multiplies it. Every execution created new claimants. Every confiscated estate produced sons who would grow up memorizing the names of those responsible. The dead did not stay dead. They lived on in grievance. And nowhere was this clearer than with the children. Every succession war eventually reaches the same conclusion. Children become dangerous, not because they can rule, but because they might. In a world where blood determines power, a child's existence is a threat simply by breathing. He does not need allies. He does not need ambition. His lineage alone is enough to justify murder. England learned this lesson in silence. After the Wars of the Roses exhausted themselves, 2 boys were taken to the Tower of London. Officially, it was for their safety. Unofficially, it was to remove them from sight. Edward V was 12 years old. His brother Richard was younger. They were princes. They vanished. No public execution, no trial, no announcement, just absence. History would later argue about what happened, bones, confessions, suspects, but England did not need proof. Everyone understood the mathematics of power. A living heir invites rebellion. A dead one invites silence. This was not an exception. Across medieval Europe, child heirs disappeared with disturbing regularity. Some died of sudden illness, some fell from windows, some were sent to monasteries and never returned. A few lived long enough to be used as bargaining chips before being quietly removed. Children were easier to erase than armies. They did not fight back. They did not leave behind veterans hungry for revenge. They simply became stories told in whispers. This is the darkest inheritance Westeros takes from history. Bran Stark is thrown from a tower not because he is dangerous in the present, but because he might remember in the future. Tommen Baratheon is crowned not because he is fit, but because he is controllable. Rickon Stark exists only as leverage. In these systems, childhood is brief. A boy learns quickly that kindness does not protect him. A girl learns that marriage will be decided long before she understands what it means. Love is conditional. Safety is temporary. Many princes grew into men shaped by this fear. Some became cautious to the point of paralysis. Others became cruel, believing cruelty was armor. A few clung to the idea that birth alone would protect them. History is full of their graves. The tragedy is not only that these children died, it is that their deaths stabilized kingdoms. Order returned not through justice, but through absence. And once rulers learned that lesson, they never forgot it. The crown no longer waited for rivals to grow. It eliminated them early. There are moments in history when the law is clear, and everyone ignores it. In the early 12th century, England faced such a moment. King Henry I had lost his only legitimate son to the sea. The succession should have ended there, in chaos. Instead, Henry did something radical. He named his daughter. Matilda was not a figurehead. She was educated, politically experienced, and already ruling lands abroad. Henry gathered his lords and made them swear, publicly, formally, that they would recognize her as queen. They knelt. They promised. Then Henry died, and promises became negotiable. Before Matilda could claim the throne, her cousin Stephen seized it. He was male, present, and willing. For many lords, that was enough. Others hesitated. A few remained loyal. Most waited, watching which way the wind would turn. What followed was not a single war, but a slow unraveling. Castles changed hands without battles. Towns were taxed by one ruler in the morning and another by nightfall. Oaths were sworn and broken with paperwork, not blood, until blood became unavoidable. Chroniclers struggled to describe the period. One finally stopped trying. Christ and his saints slept. That was all he wrote. England did not collapse into spectacle. It decayed. Law failed first. Justice followed. Survival became personal rather than political. Peasants hid grain. Lords fortified manors. No one trusted peace. Matilda came close, closer than history likes to admit. She entered London. She was acknowledged as ruler, and then the city turned on her. Not because she ruled poorly, but because she ruled as a woman. Expectations strangled her before policy could. She fled in winter, escaping across a frozen river, wrapped in white like a corpse. She never wore the crown, but her son would. History absorbed another lesson. A woman may be named heir, but the realm decides whether that naming matters. In Westeros, Rhaenyra Targaryen would inherit this truth in fire and blood. Her claim would be legal. Her supporters would swear oaths, and when the moment came, those oaths would fracture under fear, ambition, and convenience. The dance of the dragons did not invent betrayal. It remembered it. There was a rule older than crowns. If a man fed you, you were safe beneath his roof. Hospitality was sacred across medieval Europe. To share bread and salt was to suspend violence, if only for a night. Even enemies understood this, especially enemies. Which is why breaking this rule carried such power. In 15th century Scotland, two young brothers from a powerful clan were invited to dine with the king. They were not soldiers, they were teenagers. Their presence was meant to signal reconciliation, the end of suspicion. The table was full, the wine flowed, music played. Then the servants carried in a black bull's head and placed it before the boys. They knew what it meant. The feast ended. The brothers were dragged outside and executed. The event became known as the Black Dinner. It did not end rebellion. It taught something worse. Trust itself could be weaponized. After this, invitations became suspect. Peace talks felt like traps. Every banquet carried the memory of that table, that symbol, that moment when tradition failed. Rulers learned that killing an enemy in battle removed one problem. Killing him while he believed himself safe removed many. Fear lingered longer than blood. History repeated the lesson across Europe. Guests arrested mid-meal, rivals poisoned by hosts who smiled while pouring wine, treaties signed in the morning and violated before nightfall. Ceremony became camouflage. This is why the Red Wedding feels so unbearable. It violates something ancient in the viewer, the idea that there are places where violence must pause. When those places fall, nothing remains sacred. In Westeros, music masks murder. In history, so did prayers. Once hospitality died, power no longer needed justification. It needed only opportunity. A locked door, a trusted cup, a moment of lowered guard. The crown learned that betrayal worked best when wrapped in normalcy. After that, no table was safe.
There comes a point when rulers stop asking to be loved. They ask to be obeyed. When loyalty fails and tradition collapses, fear becomes the simplest language left. It does not require persuasion. It does not depend on memory. It works immediately. Medieval Europe learned this lesson repeatedly, often after exhausting every other option. In times of rebellion, kings burned villages not because those villages had rebelled, but because others might consider it. Fields were destroyed before harvest, livestock slaughtered where they stood. Hunger finished what soldiers began. This was not chaos, it was policy. William of Normandy understood it in 1066. After conquering England, resistance flared in the north. William answered with fire. The countryside was devastated so completely that chroniclers struggled to describe it. Entire communities vanished from record. The land itself became a warning. History would call him the conqueror. Those who lived under him learned what the title meant. Fear traveled faster than armies. In Eastern Europe, a prince named Vlad ruled a borderland constantly threatened by larger powers. He lacked resources, allies, and time, so he chose terror. Roads lined with impaled bodies greeted invaders before any battle could begin. Many turned back without fighting. His cruelty became legend. So did his effectiveness. History remembers him as a monster. History also remembers that his enemies hesitated. Westeros reflects this logic without disguise. Dragons are not symbols of nobility, they are instruments of enforcement. A single public burning accomplishes what months of negotiation cannot. Aegon the Conqueror did not unite the Seven Kingdoms through diplomacy. He made resistance feel pointless. Fear reshaped governance. Castles were built larger, darker, more isolated. Punishments grew theatrical. Executions were staged to be seen, not merely completed. Justice became performance. The message was always the same. Disobedience is expensive. And once fear is normalized, it spreads inward. Courts become suspicious. Advisors speak carefully. Brothers watch brothers. Rulers begin to imagine enemies everywhere because they trained their subjects to think the same way. Terror protects the throne. It also poisons it. Children learn early that survival depends on observation, not trust. Princes and princesses are educated not in compassion, but in calculation. Silence becomes armor. Knowledge becomes a weapon. They are taught to anticipate betrayal before it arrives. History is full of heirs shaped by fear. Some become cautious to paralysis. Others become cruel, believing cruelty protects them. Few survive intact. The crown itself becomes a tool of terror. And in the end, power is maintained not by love, but by fear alone. Fear does not stop at the gates. It seeps inward. Courts become ecosystems where survival depends on subtlety rather than swordsmanship. Advisors whisper in corners. Documents are drafted with hidden meanings. Decisions are approved on paper, then reversed in private. The most dangerous rulers are those who never touch a blade. They know power travels through patience, observation, and timing. The Byzantine Empire perfected this.
Rivals were blinded or castrated rather than killed, ensuring no new contender would emerge. Poison became the tool of choice. Every banquet, every meeting, every audience was a potential battlefield. Loyalty was temporary, suspicion constant. Westeros mirrors this. The small council manipulates, observes, and punishes silently. Words are weapons. Silence is a shield. A single misplaced phrase can cost a life or a dynasty. This environment breeds a specific kind of person, not the brave, the clever, the cautious, the observant, the patient, those who move only when the outcome is already certain. Varys, Littlefinger, Maesters, all find their truth here. History taught them well. Every lord, every heir, every crown that relied on fear rather than love needed intermediaries who understood the machinery of survival. Children are educated within this machine. They learn early that trust is a liability, that kindness may be fatal, that knowledge is more protective than courage. Princes and princesses are not raised to rule. They are raised to endure. And when they finally inherit, the lessons are already written on their bones. The court eats itself because fear is the most efficient advisor. Power cannot endure otherwise. In the courts of Europe, children were never innocent. They were pawns, hostages, wards. A young prince did not simply wait for his turn to rule. He waited to survive. Every tutor, every companion, every lesson was preparation for betrayal. Every word spoken to him could be recorded and used against him. Every alliance he formed as a child might later become a trap. Heirs were educated in two curriculums simultaneously, one for knowledge, one for vigilance. History, literature, and warfare sat alongside lessons in observation, secrecy, and deception. They learned to anticipate treachery before it arrived. Silence was taught as a form of armor. Theon Greyjoy's story is not fantasy. Across Europe, noble children were routinely taken as wards, ostensibly for education, but in reality as insurance. A rebellious lord knew what would happen to his son if he defied the king. Many obeyed, some rebelled anyway, and paid the price. Some children became cautious to paralysis. Some became cruel, believing cruelty to be protection. A few survived, shaped entirely by fear, manipulation, and loss. This was the inheritance of the crown. In Westeros, every Stark, every Baratheon, every Targaryen born into royalty internalizes the same lessons. Children are never allowed to be naive. Love is conditional. Safety is temporary. Survival is the first education, and only later comes rule. The throne demanded this, and every child who sat near it learned it too well. Once fear governs the court, and children are trained to endure betrayal, the crown itself becomes a catalyst for destruction. Dynasties do not simply die, they unravel. The Wars of the Roses showed this vividly. Cousins killed cousins. Brothers betrayed brothers. Sons became pawns in battles their fathers started. Entire houses were extinguished not through a single battle, but through generations of mistrust and calculated violence. In France, similar patterns repeated during the Valois succession crises. Heirs died young, regents seized power, alliances shifted mid-year. Entire territories changed hands not by conquest, but by political maneuvering that masqueraded as loyalty. Westeros mirrors this reality. The Targaryens, once united by fire, were torn apart by ambition and paranoia. Each succession crisis created new enemies within the family. Every marriage became a battlefield, every birth a potential threat. Bloodlines consumed themselves as they sought to preserve themselves. History teaches the same lesson over and over. Power is a zero-sum game. No victory lasts. No family remains intact. Even those who survive are marked. Survivors inherit fear as their most trusted advisor, cruelty as their tool, and vigilance as their religion. The crown does not reward, it teaches, and its lessons are often fatal.
While kings and lords fought, plotted, and burned, ordinary people bore the true cost. Wars left fields unplanted, trade routes became perilous, villages were pillaged not once but repeatedly as armies passed through. Famine followed closely behind. Hunger does not negotiate. Hunger does not choose sides. Plague was the cruelest equalizer. Entire towns vanished in weeks. Chroniclers recorded numbers because individuals became too numerous to mourn. Some families lost multiple children in a single season. Survivors learned quickly that death was constant and life was conditional. Sieges turned cities into tombs. Those who survived the initial assault often died from starvation or disease while walls held firm. The quiet horror of waiting became worse than the violence itself. People adapted to suffering because adaptation was survival. This silent apocalypse left no banners to wave, no oaths to swear, no monuments to witness it. History often overlooks the nameless, but Westeros remembers them in the grim expressions of starving peasants, the hollow eyes of displaced children, the silent obedience that fills Winterfell and King's Landing alike. Kings and queens may wage war, but it is the people who endure it, learn from it, and carry the scars into the next generation. Powerful families manipulate, kill, and betray. The silent majority suffers, survives, and ultimately remembers. And in remembering, they shape the future in ways even kings cannot control.
History is rarely kind to those who inherit it. The mistakes of fathers and mothers, the cruelty of kings and queens, the terror enacted by advisors and generals, all of it accumulates in the bloodlines that follow. Children born into royalty carry not only titles, but also the memories of every betrayal, every massacre, every famine that preceded them. In medieval Europe, heirs learned quickly that lineage is both privilege and burden. Every decision was informed by what had come before.
Fear and mistrust were taught alongside governance and diplomacy. Love was secondary, survival came first. The Targaryens of Westeros inherit this legacy fully. Rhaenyra remembers not just her legal claim, but the betrayals that cost her father his throne. Aegon learns that conquest is only possible through fear. Each generation is haunted by the failures of the last and compelled to repeat them, often unknowingly. The crown does not forgive. It does not forget. It shapes those who wear it, bending children into rulers who can survive the poison, the blade, the fire. Power becomes both inheritance and curse. And so the cycle continues. Dynasties rise, decay, and die. Children are trained to endure what their parents could not. And the memory of blood ensures that the next ruler will act with caution, cruelty, or both, keeping the lessons of history alive. Because in kingdoms shaped by fear, nothing teaches like the past, and nothing lasts except the legacy of blood. As the centuries of war, betrayal, and terror accumulate, one truth becomes clear. History is not a straight line. Power is not inherited, it is taken, it is defended, and it is lost. The stories of kings, queens, princes, and princesses reveal a world in which survival often matters more than justice, and cruelty more than compassion. Ordinary people endure, adapt, and survive, carrying forward the lessons imposed by their rulers. Westeros, with its dragons, schemes, and bloody feasts, is a mirror of this reality. Its fantasy is grounded in the truths of human behavior. Ambition corrupts, fear enforces, and the consequences of power echo across generations. History teaches that the throne is never safe, that loyalty is temporary, and that innocence is fleeting. It shows that children are molded by survival, that dynasties consume themselves, and that ordinary people bear the silent cost of ambition. And yet, despite centuries of suffering, humanity persists. Because even in darkness, life continues, and stories endure. Westeros is not just a tale of fantasy. It is a reflection of the blood-soaked lessons history has left behind, of the crowns that poisoned, the courts that devoured, and the legacies that survived. This is where fantasy meets history, where dragons are not the monsters, the people are, and the cycle never ends. History is rarely kind. It does not forget. It does not forget. The crowns that poisoned, the courts that devoured, and the children who learned too early, all of it reminds us that power has a price, and that human nature is its own greatest monster. If you think the horrors of Westeros are just fantasy, remember they are echoes of the past, painted in blood across centuries of kingdoms, dynasties, and forgotten lives. We survive, adapt, and witness, and in witnessing we remember. Because only by remembering the darkness of history can we hope to recognize it in the present. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows of human ambition and the legacies of fear, subscribe, leave a comment, and turn on notifications.
More dark histories and untold horrors await here on Knox Hour. Until next time, keep your eyes open and never forget what lurks behind the crown.